Okay, my name is Andrew Hansen. I have chosen to do concussions for my research project. Um, and the reason I chose to do concussions is because I have a personal history with this condition. In high school, throughout my football career, I had 3 to 4 concussions, which caused residual symptoms for about 1 to 2 years, maybe. I haven't noticed any symptoms that I've had post my concussions, but I just wanted to gain a little more insight into what happens to the brain over a long course of time um, for those who have had concussions, especially at an adolescent age. And so, what is a concussion? A concussion is caused by is a condition caused by blunt force trauma to the head that displaces the brain within the skull. So the reason I have a woodpecker on the side of this slide is because humans don't have a biological mechanism that shields the brain from trauma due to blunt force. And so, by contrast, a woodpecker does have a biological mechanism that shields the brain, and that mechanism is its tongue that surrounds the brain and acts as it coddles the brain when it pecks a tree. And so, but because of that, the brain doesn't receive any damage from how hard it pecks the tree. But unfortunately for humans, we do not have that mechanism. So our brain is surrounded by a fluid within the skull, and when we have an experience that is blunt force trauma to our head, the brain actually hits either the side of the skull or the front or the back of the skull, which causes many different things to the brain, um, and is what we call concussions. So general symptoms, this is pretty standard for anybody suffering from a concussion, more or less. There's some symptoms and sometimes, and there's less symptoms other times. So first is loss of consciousness, headache, dizziness, fatigue, photosensitivity, nausea, cognitive impairment, emotional symptoms like depression or anxiety, and then sleep difficulties. So this is primarily what I was looking for in the research is the long-term effects. And so, like, the symptoms that I just ran through, that's pretty standard across the board of any person that has a concussion. But some people have long-term symptoms and effects, and sometimes others don't. Um, and so for long-term effects, there's this thing called second impact syndrome. Um, and what happens in that event is a person gets a initial concussion. So a football player gets knocked in the head, and that's the initial contact, right? Helmet to helmet contact, and then maybe just perhaps that person um, hits the ground, and that's a second impact. And so what happens on the second impact is the brain swells, and during that event, usually that happens to be it ends in death. But the reason I put this in long term effects is because the more concussions you get, the easier they are to happen, and so the easier you're able to get them over time. And so if you get another concussion, second impact syndrome is more likely than if someone just had one or two. Second is learning difficulties. This could be anything from, you know, ADHD, ADD, and then learning disabilities. That these things can also be linked to concussions. Um, Third is early onset Alzheimer's, and I'll connect this with CTE because CTE is typically associated with Alzheimer's. Sometimes there's misdiagnosis for CTE to be Alzheimer's, and really it's just CTE. And what CTE is a progressive degenerative condition that happens as a result of multiple concussions over a long expanse of time. So this is pretty normalized in players in the NFL that had long careers. Is they started to find that many football players have advanced CTE and are dying at young ages, like their 50s, um, and maybe even earlier in some cases. And this is because over a long career, you take many, many different hits. And so this isn't just getting one or two concussions or even three or four, like in my case. This is concussion. This is regular hits to the head over a long period of time. And so then comes severe cerebral vascular congestion, which is an obstruction of normal flow of blood in the brain blood vessel network. And so this happens when someone, again, has multiple concussions and can be very serious and often leads to death. And so those are the scary long-term effects. Again, a lot of these are for people that have had multiple concussions over a long period of time. And so that's the subtle nuance that I found in the research. So moving on, we go to treatment, which is the second part of my research. And the first one was actually took me by surprise because in my experience, aerobic exercise was actually hard for me in my recovery, and even for a long period of time afterward. I always got lightheaded and had a headache and felt like I was going to throw up when I exercised for a while. So I just wholesale stopped exercising for about 1 to 2 years. And I attributed that to my concussion, but what I think actually happened was like I needed more exercise at post concussion, because what aerobic exercise does is it promotes neuroplasticity and neurogenesis. Neuroplasticity helps the brain change and create new neural pathways. Neurogenesis actually helps the brain grow. And so post concussion, the research really shows that the more exercise, the better. The second two, cognitive behavioral therapy and serotonin reuptake inhibitors, are just treatments that help with depression, anxiety that is caused by concussion. And so these have been proven to at least help the symptoms post concussion. And then meditation and prayer. The reason I have a question behind this is because the research doesn't really bear out that meditation and prayer help, because, like in my last point, there's just little research. But nonetheless, I just pose a question. I read Andrew Newberg's book called How God Changes the Brain. And in that brain, he does many, many studies on people that meditate and pray. And the research that he came up with showed that meditation and prayer can lead to decreased chances of getting Alzheimer's or other degenerative brain conditions. It helps promote neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, and causes wholesale well-being in the whole body. And so this is just a question. I have no research to bear this out besides what Andrew Newberg put in his book, especially linking his findings to concussions. I just simply asked the question, could meditation and prayer be a legitimate treatment modality? And moving on to my next point, again, there's little research that shows in a longitudinal sense over a person's life that there are any treatments that wholesale help reverse symptoms that happen post concussions, that promote neurogenesis, We've been able to see little evidence for it, but not enough. And so that's where I will conclude, is because of this little longitudinal research with adolescents through adult age. We just don't know exactly how first of all the brains are affected by concussions, and we have little research to show comprehensive treatment modalities that prove to reverse damage in the brain by concussions. So there's just a cause for need for a cause for more research. And what really can happen with concussions is just a negative outlook because it's scary. We've, you know, we've been privy to it. People who've played football, a lot of them have had concussions, but this isn't regretful. This is an area for more research and modality breakthroughs for further treatments, and hopefully in the future we'll be able to legitimately reverse the symptoms and problems within the brain that are caused by concussions. And so that is where I will end. Hopefully, that's on a more hopeful note, because the advanced long-term effects and the little research for treatments can put people into an uneasy position. Even for myself, when I was studying this stuff, looking through the studies and whatnot, I got a little afraid, but I truly believe that not only from a medical perspective, a scientific perspective, that we can, learn how to reverse the effects of concussions, but also from a spiritual component, that through meditation and prayer, I really believe that there is some connection to be made. I don't know at what level or at what efficacy, but there is that hope that I do have, that God is in that process of healing and regeneration of the brain, if we would learn how to meditate and pray, especially for those of us who are Christian.